I want to say that first off, I will be talking about the fiscal and economic benefits of the expenditure programs. Both the the lack of benefits that arose during the period of fiscal contraction, which we started experiencing from the crisis, and then what an expansionary program is like. But on the way, I want to make a few observations, including trying to nail down a comparison between the expenditure supports under the disability function. That's how it goes?
Down and up, yeah.
Okay. Across Europe, to see where we are in comparative terms. Now I have a ton of slides. I'm going to skip through a lot of them, and I'm going to focus on a few. I will try to keep numbers to a minimum and try to tell a story behind it, but there will be a few numbers. The first thing, though, is this is really, there we go, sorry, yeah. First thing I want to comment, and I want to thank Dorothy for pointing this out to me, because, we get a lot of, sorry? Oh, sorry. Sorry, I kind of wander around. I don't like being a lecturer. Anyway, because we get a lot of conflicting information regarding, relative poverty lines, consistent poverty lines, income lines, equivalized lines, and of course, when taking the measure of deprivation, which I think is a very useful measurement, it's actually a subjective thing. We actually go and ask people what their experience is. Now, this relates to, and I just want to look at these two things. These relate between 2008 and 2012. 2012 is the last year we have data for. It's for the category of those who are not at work due to illness and benefit. And as Dorothy pointed out to me, this doesn't include, of course, people who are in the workforce. It doesn't include people who are unemployed. But I nonetheless, I think it's relevant. Because what it shows is that in terms of, you just look at the first thing, just focus on deprivation, 50% of those who are not at work because they have an illness or disability, 50% suffer multiple deprivation experiences. That is an incredibly high figure, 1 in 2. But it's just as high as it is for the state. In the state, more than 1 in 4 people suffer multiple deprivation experiences. They are categorized by the CSO as living in deprivation. 1 in 3 children suffer deprivation. So when you go out this door today, more than 1 in 4 people live in deprivation. 1 in 3 children. And frighteningly enough, 1 in 6 people in the workforce suffer deprivation. So much for this idea that having a job is a pathway out of poverty. The reason I want to because I want to talk about the things that have been happening to payments and happening to living standards, but that's where we're starting off in 2012. High levels of deprivation, something which unfortunately does not get much airtime. There's not much of a debate. You don't turn on current affairs program and hear this being discussed. Now, and I will come back to what this actually refers to, but over the period between 2003 and 2011, under this Eurostat measurement, Eurostat is nothing but the EU's Commission's data collection agency, much like the CSO is for here, and that's the latest year we have data for. Expenditure on what's called disability income supports or disability function increased substantially, nearly doubled in that period, from about 1.1 billion to 2 billion. However, it kind of topped out at 2009 and started falling. Now, the reason for this increase is not only because social protection rates, the basic social protection rate increased by 51%, but also there was a higher demand for these income supports. Now, I'm not going to go through every column on this, but I want to make a point, because there's this thing we keep hearing in the debate, that social protection rates have been protected for the last 3 years. No, they haven't. They have not been protected. As you can see here, take disability allowance for a single person. The same percentages apply for couples and couples with children. Nominal. That means the actual amount of money that was cut, the actual euro and cent. They were cut in 2010, 2011, and then after that, they were not cut. So I suppose in that sense, you can say that they were protected. However, in real terms, and that's why it's called real terms for a very good reason, because it's about the real world. when you factor in inflation, you find it didn't fall as much in 2010 because we were in a period of deflation. But once 2011 hit, the actual real cut was much larger than the nominal cut. And in 2012, and in 13, and in 14, they have been cut in real terms. In other words, the basic rate has been frozen, but living standards have been cut. Everyone knows this. If I'm paid 100 euros this year, and inflation's 5% next year, if I don't get a €5 increase, my living standard is cut. My real pay gets cut. The same thing with invalidity program, all the social protection programs. As well, there are cash supports that are delivered through what are called tax expenditures. It's the same thing as a direct expenditure from the social protection, except it's delivered through the tax system. And there, I've just taken three categories. You can see that there's about 18,000 people who rely on these transfers through the tax system, but those allowances were cut by 10% in 2010. Just want to make one reference, and then we'll start moving into the heart of the thing, because there's a little bit of a mistake there, but something that the Commission on Taxation highlighted, and this affects low pay, and it's not only just in terms of expenditure support, say through incapacitated child credit or through blind person's credit. It happens through all personal credits. But the thing is that there's a lot of low-paid people who get no benefit from these tax supports. Anyone earning below $16,500 receive no benefit from the extra credits that you might receive if you're looking after an incapacitated child or if you happen to be blind, simply because you're below the tax threshold. If you are between $16,500 and $24,000, you will only receive a partial amount of it because it keeps bringing you down below the tax threshold. And once you're below the tax threshold, you get no benefit from any credit, obviously. It's only after you get to about 25,000 euros that you receive the full benefit. Now, the Commission on Taxation said this was inequitable. It discriminated against people on low pay who were in these conditions. And they recommended that actually all these supports should be paid directly through the Department of Social Protection and then phased out. But not only then do we see that people with disabilities relying on social protection payments have suffered in real terms substantially over the period, we also find that those on low pay are also discriminated against because they can't take advantage of the full tax expenditure. There's one more thing. There's this idea that somehow poor people don't pay taxes. I like the idea because it's only working people and the alarm clock people pay taxes. Everybody pays taxes. And one of the biggest taxes, of course, is VAT and excise. And the fact is that increases in indirect taxation affect those on the lower incomes. And here's just an example. This is from the Nevin Economic and Research Institute that shows that VAT increases, the 2% VAT increase in 2012 disproportionately hit those on the lower incomes is where we find the majority of people who are either ill or people with disability, much higher than it hit the top rate. So there has been a squeezing of living standards through cuts in cash, increases in regressive taxation, programs that do not benefit the low pay. Now, next two items I want to get into, the two main things. One is how do we compare with Europe? Now, these are difficult comparisons. The data is not consistent. There's different categories. As the OECD has explained, because they actually undertook a very comprehensive exercise back in 2009 or 2010, you're dealing with very complex systems across Europe. They developed in piecemeal fashion. So sometimes you have to be as much a detective to find out what this is as you do just kind of being a straight data analyst. So therefore, this should be treated as indicative. More research is required, so you can treat this as a work in progress. But first start off with the government statement. I think the government stated that they spent 6 billion euros a year on disability services and income supports. They claimed this in an amendment to a motion during private members' time, I think just only last summer. So they claimed that, rather than not spending enough, they spent 6 billion. Which is about 3.3% of GDP. Now, maybe that the government is counting all sorts of things in that. I'm not here to challenge that figure. But what I am here is to use the actual figures that the government supplies to the EU Commission and compare that with other European with the data from other European countries. So what I'm going to be presenting in some of this next stuff, and I'll point out to you, is actually what our own government has applied to the EU under things. And there's a Eurostat categorization that's called the disability function. It's made up of two parts. First, you see cash benefits, anything from benefits like payments like disability allowance, early retirement, care allowance paid to people, economic integration, that's when people go back to work, any kind of top-up payments when they go back to training, take up vocational training or in work, or lump sum payments. Just as crucially, is the non-cash payments, accommodation, bed, board, and lodging, assistance in carrying out daily tasks, and that's where home help would be categorized. Rehabilitation, provision of goods and services under rehabilitation and vocational training, and other benefits. And by the way, this is the wording from the Eurostat manual, and I think it's significant. Miscellaneous services and goods provided to people to enable them to participate in leisure and cultural activities, or to travel and or to participate in community life. So that's actually how the EU categorizes that. And what do we find? We find Ireland at the bottom of the table. We're even lower than Portugal. And Portugal's far poorer than us. We're above Greece, but everybody's above Greece in these kind of categories. We're well below the EU 15 average, and we're well below, interestingly enough, other small open economies. You've heard that phrase, and we're always saying, well, we're a small open economy. We're different than Germany. Well, of course that's true. Germany's a larger economy, and it's closed. But countries like Denmark, Sweden, Finland, Austria, Netherlands, those are all also small open economies. Look how far we are behind. Now, the problem with this measurement is that they've provided this measurement per capita. In other words, they take all the expenditure on the cash and non-cash benefits, and they divide it up for everybody in the population. So we got to kind of start doing a little bit of detective work, because if you have what's called a recipiency rate, and this actually this doesn't affect people at work, this affects people who are reliant upon social protection. If you have a recipient rate that's really low compared to other EU countries, in other words, if you have fewer people demanding this, well, of course your expenditure is going to be lower. But if it's high, if you have a lot of people in the working age population that's demanding this, of course you need higher expenditure. Sorry, I just wanted to just break this down. That's the cash payments. We're well below the cash payments. And as you can see, in terms of the goods and services, home helps, accommodation, those grants for community participation, we're just really, we're very, you'd have to almost quadruple the level just to reach the EU average. I'm just going to kind of go through here. Here's where, it's, we have to be cautious, because the EU doesn't provide a recipiency rate. How much of the working age population, receives these type of payments, whether cash or non-cash? So we have to go to the OECD, and the latest one they have is 2007. By the way, these recipient rates, they don't change very much over the years, but we just have to remember that it's not a good thing to compare one data set with another. You have to be careful. If you could help it, don't do it. But nonetheless, this shows that Ireland actually has a higher rate than the EU average. So that would suggest that we should be making more payments per capita, whereas we saw that we do far less. So here's my own estimation. It is only an estimate. As I said, it mixes sources. It's not wholly satisfactory. Another thing is that this does not count payment per recipient. It does not count payments for dependents, because that's under another function in the Eurostat. That's under family and child allowances. However, only 10% of people on disability allowances have an adult dependent. I think it's 15% of invalidity pension. So we're not talking about, it's probably broadly the same across Europe, but I don't want to say that's conclusive. As you can see, you would have to almost double the amount of payments per recipient to reach the EU 15 average. Almost double. And if you want to get up to very high levels, now, Denmark, I wouldn't worry about Denmark. It looks like a lot. It's 40,000. The problem is they have very high prices, very high living standards. If you factored in living standards, it would come down. It would still be top. As you can see, all the other countries pay very high levels. And what you can see as well, I just broke it down again between cash and non-cash. It would have to increase by 50% the cash level, but more importantly, sorry, I forgot to didn't put that in blue, but you would have to be nearly trebling the amount of non-cash benefits, which are so vital and which are an important part of the European system, but not an important part of ours. This is not to challenge the government's statement, but this is to show in their own statistics that essentially we are an ultra low spend country in European comparison. Secondly, we can see that the other European countries put so much emphasis on goods and services, because it's not just about people's income support being cut, but I think, as was pointed out by Dr. Conan, if people's goods and services that are provided by the state for free or for a subsidized rate, if they are cut, then people may have the same income, but they have to spend more on what was previously provided, or they have to do without, which creates all sorts of issues. I just make this one final thing. We always talk about, Ireland being a member of Europe. We have these debates about the Eurozone being a member of the EU, and of course we have to do things. We have to get our deficit down to 3%, and we have all these fiscal rules and all that. Well, whatever you think about that, I think it's time that Ireland actually joined Europe, joined social Europe, because this is not unique in terms of people with disabilities. This spreads across. For instance, the government might say, well, yes, we only spend like $2 billion, and well, no, we should probably double it up to $4 billion to reach EU averages. But look at all that other money we spent, which is mostly money on public services. Now, that is very difficult to compare. But I'll just give you this. There is a lack of appreciation in this country about how so little we spend on public services. Taking these small open economies, if we wanted to spend the same level as they do in Finland, we'd have to spend $7 billion more a year on public services. Not social transfers, public services. Belgium, 9 billion more. And if you want to be like the levels of Netherlands and Denmark, you'd have to spend 15 billion euros more a year. We don't appreciate how low we are in Europe, because when we look out at Europe, our horizon ends at the cliffs of Dover. All we do is compare ourselves to Britain all the time. And Britain happens to be a bottom dweller itself. In relation to that. Okay, quickly I want to talk about the impact on fiscal contraction, because then we're going to talk about how would it cost much to get us back out of this situation. 10 minutes? All right, I'll move quickly here. I want to look at two things. First off, what was the impact of fiscal contraction? Sorry, austerity. I tried to use fiscal contraction because it's a more neutral term. The government pursues spending cuts, tax increases, it contracts the economy. Okay, let's call it austerity. And let's use the impact assessments by the Nevin Economic and Research Institute. There is this idea that if you cut spending, say we say 1,000 euros, just make it easy numbers, that somehow that means that your deficit falls by 1,000 euros. That is absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. That is incorrect. And part of the reason that we have lengthened and deepened the recession as we fell, policymakers fell for this misconception. Give you an idea. If you cut 500 million euros off social protection rates, does the deficit fall by 500 million? Of course not. Because what happens? Well, those people have less money to spend, so consumer spending falls. Businesses has less income, so they in turn and go and actually squeeze the wages of their employees, or sometimes lay them off, or cut back their working hours, and then those employees have less to spend. And the government, of course, has less tax revenue in terms of VAT and excise. So what the NERI does is they take the impact of a budget adjustment. Look at all the economic impacts, consumer spending, employment, and all that. They see what happens there, and then how much the government actually saved when you factor in all those things. Now, in the government, I just took a look at the social protection, cuts in the basic social protection rates. That's all. That's all this represents. And I estimate that the cuts to the main programs that give disability support was about 16% of the total cut. So it ended up being 135 million was cut from disability allowance and invalidity pension or something like that. I'm not going to go through all this, but as you can see, they cut 135 million. As a consequence, they cut 165 million out of consumer spending. Because don't forget, the effect keeps going on through. And as I said, it's not only those people who lose consumer spending, but also the other people that. 165 million. That's more businesses out of business, or more businesses cutting back. 1,200 people lost their jobs because of the loss of consumer spending. At the end of the day, the deficit only went down by 70 million, not 135. And what did it register on as that famous percentage of GDP? It doesn't even register. It is statistically meaningless. 0.03% of GDP. It's pennies in the pocket. I'm sorry, but the fact is that a lot of people took a lot of pain when their basic social protection rates were cut, and it made absolutely no difference to the deficit. That is the illogic of austerity. Same thing if you look at employment reductions in the public sector, it would probably have the same impact if grants are being cut to voluntary organizations, and that immediately in turn means that those people have lost their job. Again, no savings to that, but actually the impact on the economy in terms of employment is even worse. So, I will try to end up on some good news. Because I've given some pretty bad news about, high levels of poverty, the fact that social protection rates have not been protected, low paid in the workforce, don't get to take full, or even any of the, benefits that should be allowed to them, or the fact that the program of austerity, in terms of it applied in this respect, had no impact, but, had a lot of pain. The good news is that because the cut doesn't have much of an impact on public finances, the increase doesn't either, because you just turn everything upside down. You give somebody extra money, especially those on low incomes. Actually, this sounds a terrible thing to say, but they are a conduit into the consumer economy. Yes, I know there are men and women. I know they're a man or a woman, and they have dreams and hopes like the rest of us. Economists they look at that and say, you give money to somebody on low income, they're going to go off and spend it. It's a conduit. It's a transfer mechanism. That has its own benefits, which means that the economic impact is strong, but the impact on the deficit is much weaker. Very quickly, I have 5 minutes. Just want to let you know what's in store so that nobody's under any surprises. Now, this is from the latest government projections, their stability program update. Now, they'll be producing another one in the budget, so it'll be interesting to see that. But we've all heard that austerity is going to end in 2015, or it might even end this year. Who knows? Actually, again, using inflation, because remember, we live in the real world, therefore we have to look at real increases. What will we see? What does the government itself project between up to 2018? That spending on public service will be cut by 3% in real terms. That spending on social protection will be cut by 9%. Now, of course, less unemployed. Good. Hopefully that's good. But the problem is you have an equal amount of old age pensioners growing. That cohort is growing as well, so that might cancel out. Investment in overall spending. So right now what we're looking into is a period of continued austerity, but under the radar, using inflation. But however you put it, money is going to be tight. So I'm just going to leave you with this following assessment of what would happen. And this is just this is stylized. In other words, I'm just collapsing everything into 1 year as a snapshot. You couldn't do everything in 1 year. You'd have to phase it out. Also, there are so many other areas of social and economic spending that are queuing up, waiting for a piece, waiting for some of the action coming up in the next few years. But this is an assessment of 1 year. What I project is what would happen if there was a 700 million euro or 40% increase in the amount of payments under the disability function. That would bring us close, not all the way, but pretty close to the EU15 average. 600 million in non-cash benefits, those goods and services which people rely on. That again would get us close, but not there. And then a restoration of 2009 employment levels in the public sector for those that provide the disability services. What will we find? This expansion, which would cost 1.4 billion, wow, pushes up the GDP. That's good. Can't get enough of increased GDP. That's about 1%. Consumer spending increases. That means people more money in businesses. Employment grows by 14,000. Now, not in 1 year. Not in 1 year, as I say, but because of all that increased activity, and if you spread it out over the years, that's what we can look forward to. The deficit would rise by half. That's all, half, or about 0.4%. We sometimes ask the question, how much will this cost? I think it's a better question to ask is, what is the price of this? What is the price of getting people out of deprivation? What is the price of giving them goods and services that improve their living standards? What is the price of driving their income levels up to, EU levels, income levels by which they can have a participatory life? What is the price of increasing substantial numbers of employment in the economy? Is that a good price? 0.4% of GDP? I think it's one of the best prices you're ever going to get in the economic world today. It's not a cost, it's a price, and it's a very good price. It's a better price than some of the options that are being touted about on the current affairs programs. And, no gold medals for guessing what kind of options those are being looked at. So there, I'm going to end that and just say that if anybody says that it would cost too much to provide people, and this is not just the issue with people with disability. It's lone parents. It's low-paid workers. It's elderly living alone who are subject to high levels of poverty and deprivation. If they say the cost is too high, just say, no, the cost is not high at all. In fact, it's a very good price. Thank you.